Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're exploring a truly fascinating concept. You know the author with a capital A? Well, it turns out that isn't some timeless fact of nature, but actually a historical invention. For most of human history, the creators behind the stories we love were practically invisible. But today, they're celebrities, they're rock stars. So how exactly did that happen? We're going to trace the transition from ancient manuscript cultures all the way to the commodification of text. We'll look at the exact legal and technological milestones that gave birth to copyright, and with it, the modern creator.
So here is a massive question for us to chew on. Who actually invented the modern author? If you think about it, we just assume that anyone who writes a book or composes a song naturally owns that creation, right? Like they inherently deserve to be recognized for it. But as we dig into the source material today, we're going to uncover the central mystery of our story. Authorship, as we know it, wasn't a natural given at all. Instead, it's a highly constructed legal and cultural concept, one that evolved over centuries, heavily influenced by economics, technology, and philosophy. To really set the stage here, let's connect this mystery to a brilliant lyric from the singer-songwriter Van Morrison. In his song Big Time Operators, he sings, "They were glorified by the media. They were heroes who had names." I love that because it perfectly captures how we view modern creators today. We celebrate them as these heroic, solitary individuals who own their intellectual property. But as you'll see, this idea of the author as a celebrated named hero stands in incredibly stark contrast to how the ancient world viewed the people who created and recorded their texts. Section 1. The Era of Anonymous Scribes. Let's look at what the world looked like before copyright even existed. Let's travel way back to ancient Iraq, where access to cuneiform writing was super limited. The scholars and scribes copying monumental texts, things like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Enuma Elish, they generally didn't care at all about their own identity or claiming ownership over the story. In fact, as our sources point out, most compositions were completely anonymous. These scribes saw themselves merely as links in a chain of textual transmission. Their primary focus wasn't originality. It was just keeping the text going, preserving the tradition, and passing it on to the next generation. So the crucial takeaway here is this massive shift from manuscript culture to print culture. In that anonymous manuscript era, textual perpetuation and tradition took precedence over absolutely everything else. The actual identity of the author? Well, that was only important if it tied back to a divine source or some notable historical figure, just to guarantee the text's authority. But as we transition into print culture, the focus completely flips to mass production and originality. And it's this technological shift that eventually created the economic need for a named author to actually own the work. Section 2. Gutenberg commodifies the text. Now, what's really interesting about this transition is that it was driven by a massive technological shockwave in the 1440s, Johannes Gutenberg's printing press. Now, Gutenberg didn't just invent one thing out of thin air. He brilliantly combined 4 maturing technologies. You've got the screw press, movable type, the codex book format, and mechanized paper production. By bringing these specific elements together, he triggered the printing revolution. Suddenly, words were no longer just ephemeral sounds or incredibly rare hand-copied manuscripts. Through this mechanized process, text was transformed into a physical commodity, something that could be bought, sold, and traded in a rapidly expanding market. And to really understand the scale of this disruption, just consider this number, 3,600. Before the printing press, hand copying could maybe yield about 40 pages a day. But with Gutenberg's press, a single machine could produce up to 3,600 pages a day. I mean, that is a massive, unprecedented shift in scale, and it completely disrupted the old manuscript culture. It created a booming book trade, for sure, but it also created a brand new problem. Who actually gets to profit from all these mass-produced books? Now, you might think the authors started cashing in right away, but no. Early legal protections, which took the form of printing privileges or monopolies, enriched the publishers and groups like the Stationers' Company over in England. The creators themselves, they had virtually no rights. If you wrote a book, you sold the manuscript to a printer for a flat fee, and that was the whole shebang. To survive, authors still relied almost entirely on wealthy aristocratic patrons for their income. It was a system known as patronage. The publisher held the monopoly, absolutely not the writer. Section 3. The legal birth of the author. The crucial shift from patronage to property. Okay, here is the turning point, the Statute of Anne, passed by the British Parliament in 1710. This is widely recognized as the world's very first copyright statute. But here is the really surprising historical reality. It wasn't driven by some sudden, enlightened desire to champion the natural rights of artists. Nope. Instead, it was primarily a tactical move to destroy the perpetual monopolies held by the printing industry, specifically that stationer's company we just mentioned. By vesting the right to print directly in the authors for a limited term of 14 years, the government broke the publisher's stranglehold, but in doing so, they inadvertently created a profound new legal identity, the author as a property owner. Let's take a step back and see how this builds over time. In 1440, Gutenberg's press commodifies the text. Then, in 1710, the Statute of Anne wrests control from publishers and gives limited legal rights to the author. And, as we're going to discuss shortly, in 1886, the Berne Convention takes these protections to a global scale. Seeing it all laid out like this really emphasizes how copyright isn't just some static law, but a constantly evolving reaction to technology and commerce.
Section 4, Authors as Romantic Geniuses, the Cult of the Author.
But the law alone didn't turn writers into the celebrated figures we know today. There was also a massive philosophical shift. Take a look at this quote from the writer Edward Young in his 1759 essay, Conjectures on Original Composition. It's incredibly revealing. He wrote, "His works will stand distinguished. His the sole property of them, which property alone can confer the noble title of an author." This beautifully illustrates a massive semantic and cultural change. Writers were no longer viewed as mere imitators or compilers of past traditions. Instead, they were being celebrated as original, independent creators. Originality became the ultimate prize, completely separating the modern author from those anomalous scribes of the past. And the philosophers? Well, they took this even further. Over in Germany, thinkers like Immanuel Kant and Johann Gottlieb Fichte developed what's known as the personality theory. Fichte argued that while the ideas in a book might be common property, the form, meaning the specific, unique way those ideas are expressed, is the inalienable, exclusive property of the author's personality. They literally inextricably linked the creator's very soul to their intellectual property. This philosophical framing completed the entire transformation. The writer was now legally a proprietor and culturally a hero with a name. Section 5. The Berne Convention goes global. As this newfound cultural reverence for the author really solidified in Europe, it inevitably spilled across borders. By 1886, driven heavily by literary figures like the great French author Victor Hugo, the Berne Convention was formed. This international assembly had massive impacts. First off, it guaranteed national treatment, meaning member countries actually had to protect foreign authors just as they protected their own. But perhaps more importantly, it was deeply rooted in that natural rights philosophy we talked about, which believed that property rights spring directly from the creative act itself. And this brings us to a monumental shift. Under Berne, copyright became the default. Previously, authors had to jump through all these complex bureaucratic hoops, like registering their work or depositing physical copies, just to get protection. Berne completely abolished these strict formalities as a prerequisite. This cemented the modern, almost romantic idea that copyright springs naturally and instantly from the very act of authorship. You write it, you own it, period. Section 6. Why copyright matters today in the internet age. So, why does all this matter right now? Well, we are currently living through another massive technological shock, much like the printing press. The internet age, which is characterized by digital reproduction, remix culture, and collective online creation, is actively subverting this whole idea of individual authorship. Think about things like open source software, collaborative wikis, or social media trends where digital art and audio are endlessly remixed and reused by thousands of people. In some ways, you could argue we're returning to the collaborative, anonymous manuscript culture of those ancient scribes, where sharing and adapting the text takes precedence over solitary ownership. Which leaves us with this provocative final thought. We've seen exactly how the printing press and early copyright laws literally invented the modern property-owning author. But in a world of endless digital copying, collaborative editing, and artificial intelligence, what is the internet going to do to them? Will the hero with a name actually survive this new technological era? Or will authorship melt away into something entirely new? It's a fascinating question to consider as you scroll, read, and create today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the origins of the things we take for granted.